Now, when submitting the form, we need the value of our input fields. In plain or vanilla JavaScript, we can get the value of an input field like this. We call document.getElementById, pass the ID like username. This returns an input field. Then we'll access the value property, and with this we can get the username. But this is not how we should access DOM elements in React. In other words, in React applications, you should never work with the document object, because the whole point of React is to put an abstraction over document object model or DOM, so we don't work with that directly, and with this our applications would be easier to maintain and easier to unit test. But what if you really need to access a DOM element? In React, there is a way for that. In order to get access to this username element, we need to give it a reference. So first, in our component, we define a property. Let's call that username. And we set it to React.createRef. This will create a ref object. Now, here in our input element, we set the ref attribute to this.username. Now, when submitting the form, if you want to get that username, instead of working with document.getElementById, we'll work with this.username. This ref has a property, current, which returns the actual DOM element. Now we can access the value property and get the username. So if you really need to access the DOM, that's the way to do it. But when building forms, there is a better way. We're going to look at that in the next lecture. But for now, let's just finish up the discussion about refs. So as a rule of thumb, you should minimize your use of refs. Use it only when you know what you're doing. For example, sometimes you want to manage the focus of an input field. You really want to get a reference to that DOM element. Or maybe you want to work with animations or third-party DOM libraries. In those cases, it's okay to use ref, but don't overuse them just to make things happen. So as an example, in this lecture, let's see how we can use ref to set focus on a given input field. So here in our component, I'm going to add a lifecycle hook. Component did mount. When our component is mounted, I want our username field to get focus. So this.username.current, this returns a reference to our DOM element, and then we'll call the focus method. Save the changes. Back in the browser, you can see our username field has focus. Now you may argue that there is a better solution here. So instead of defining a ref, adding a component lifecycle hook, and calling the focus method, we could simply use the autofocus attribute. So here's our input field. We could apply autofocus, and note the capitalization. So F should be uppercase, because all these attributes in JSX are named using camel notation. So if you type a lowercase f, you're going to get a runtime error. Now, we apply the autofocus here, and then to prove that this works, I'm going to comment out this lifecycle hook, save the changes. Back in the browser, our input field is still selected. So as you see, you don't always have to use refs. Use them only when you really have to. In the next lecture, I'm going to show you the proper way to work with input fields and get their value.